Ever wonder who makes sure your smartphone doesn't, like, explode in your pocket, or that your smartwatch actually, well, watches the time?
You're talking about the PCB Test Technicians. They're the unsung heroes, making sure those circuit boards, the brains behind all our gadgets, are actually working like they should.
Right. And we've got a ton of articles and reports on this career path. It's a job that seems to be getting more important by the day. I mean, everyone wants the latest tech, but someone's got to make sure it actually works.
Exactly, and that's why there's such a huge demand right now for skilled PCB test technicians.
Yeah.
We're talking about an industry that's constantly changing, constantly innovating, so you always need people who can keep up and stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so it sounds pretty intense, but some of what we've read makes it sound kind of, I don't know, maybe a little repetitive, like routine. Is that really all there is to it?
It's true, there are definitely some repetitive parts to the job, but that's actually what makes a good technician. Think of it like a musician practicing scales. It might sound boring, but it's about building that muscle memory, mastering those fundamentals. That's how you can spot a problem in a second. And as you get better at the basics, you start to see the nuances, the little details that could signal a bigger issue.
So it's not just plugging in a board and running a standard test. There's more to it.
Way more to it. It's almost like being a detective. A good PCB test technician can look at a board, listen to it during testing, and just like understand what's going on. It's like they're a tech whisperer.
Okay, I like that. The tech whisperer. Now, one thing we've seen mentioned a few times is this whole idea of like specializing within PCB testing. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, good question. So as you get more experience, you might find yourself drawn to a specific type of testing, maybe focusing on one type of PCB, like, say, the ones used in medical devices. Or you could become an expert in a certain testing technique.
And specializing like that can lead to some pretty cool career moves, right?
Absolutely. You could end up in a more senior position, maybe where you're designing testing procedures for brand new products, or even working directly with engineers, like right from the beginning, to make sure the new designs are actually testable. That's a big deal.
So there's definitely room to move up. It's not like you just hit a ceiling. Speaking of getting ahead, we keep coming across these certifications. IPCA 610 and IPC 7711, IPC 7721. What are those all about?
Those certifications, yeah, those are huge in this field. They're like the gold standard. And they come from the IPC, which is a Global Electronics Association.
Basically, it proves to employers that you know what you're doing, like you really understand the ins and outs of PCB inspection and testing.
So it's kind of like a seal of approval then, from the pros.
Yeah.
Exactly, that IPCA 610. That one sets the global standard for like what a good PCB should even look like, like their rule book, you know what I mean? Then you've got the 7711, 7721 certifications, and those get into the nitty-gritty of actually repairing electronic assemblies. So you're not just finding the problems, you're learning how to fix them too.
So these certifications, they're pretty much essential if you're serious about this, right?
It's a way to show employers you're not just looking for any job, you're serious about building a career, you know?
Yeah.
This is important, especially because technology is always evolving.
And speaking of evolving, it seems like automation and robotics are changing everything when it comes to PCB manufacturing. So how does someone who wants to get into PCB testing adapt to all that change?
That's a great question, and it's something everyone in the industry is thinking about. Even though the basics of testing are still important, yeah, automation's a game changer. Knowing how to do manual testing, that's not enough anymore. You've got to be comfortable with all the automated systems. You have to know how to interpret the data and how to troubleshoot if those systems go down.
So it's not enough to just test the boards. Now you got to wrangle robots too.
Basically. These days, a PCB test technician, they need to understand the hardware side and the software side. You're part electronics whiz, part data analyst. That's just the way it is now.
Okay, so we've talked about how this job requires a really specific set of skills, and it seems like you need to be adaptable too. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How does somebody even get started in a career like this? What are the first steps? So let's say someone's listening to us and they're thinking, all right, sign me up. I want to be a PCB test technician. What's their first move?
Well, it's usually a pretty structured path, kind of like climbing a ladder. You start at the entry level and work your way up as you get more experience.
Okay, so like leveling up in a video game. I like it. So what's that first level look like? What are you actually doing day to day as a brand new PCB test technician?
Day one, it's all about mastering the fundamentals. You're the one on the front lines, literally using your eyes to make sure those boards are okay, checking that all the components are where they're supposed to be, that the soldering looks good, Anything that could turn into a problem later.
Sounds pretty detail-oriented. You definitely need a good eye for that kind of work.
Absolutely. And steady hands, too, because you're also starting to get familiar with the testing equipment, running those basic checks to make sure those circuits are actually doing what they should be doing.
I imagine there's a lot of learning from the pros at that stage, right? Like picking up tricks of the trade.
Oh, for sure. It's a very collaborative environment, especially for beginners. You're part of a team, learning from the more experienced techs. Then, as you get the hang of things, you move up to that junior technician level. And that's when you get to start taking on more responsibility.
So, like, what kind of responsibilities are we talking about?
Well, you might start running some of the more complex diagnostic tests,
Yeah.
interpreting the data that comes back, even troubleshooting basic problems.
So you're not just following instructions anymore. You have to think for yourself a little, right? Use your brain.
Exactly.
Mm.
And you know what's cool? At this level, you might even get to train some of the new recruits, passing on all that knowledge you've worked so hard for. It's like this continuous cycle, of learning and teaching, and it just keeps the field moving forward.
Makes sense. You're not just gaining experience, you're contributing to this whole network of knowledge. So what about the top of the ladder? What does a senior PCB test technician actually do that's different?
At that point, you're basically running the show. You're leading teams, maybe even designing the whole testing strategy for entire product lines. And you're working directly with engineers, making sure those new designs are actually testable. That's a big deal.
Hold on, back up. Designing testing strategies. That sounds pretty intense. What does that even mean?
Okay, so imagine this. You get a brand new PCB. Maybe it's for, I don't know, the latest gaming console or something. It's your job to figure out the best way to test that board. What tests do we need to run? What equipment are we going to use? And how do we make sense of the results? You're thinking about all of that.
So it's like you're like a PCB architect or something.
Exactly. You're not just testing anymore. You might be coming up with completely new testing methods. Maybe you even help design the boards from the beginning to make them easier to test.
Wow, that's amazing. You have a huge impact then on the whole process, not just if the product works, but how efficiently the whole thing gets made.
You got it. Senior technicians, they can spot a potential problem from a mile away. They have such a deep understanding of the entire process.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, the different levels, tasks, responsibilities. But I want our listeners to really get a feel for what this job is like. Paint us a picture. What does a typical day look like for a PCB test technician?
That's the cool thing about this job. Every day is different. But let's say you're that junior technician we were talking about. Yeah. Maybe you work for a company that makes those smart home devices that everyone's crazy about these days.
Okay, so our junior technician is working with these smart home devices. What's their day like?
So you walk in, right, and there's this big batch of shiny new PCBs. They're going to be the brains of those voice assistants. Ones. Everyone's got them in their kitchen these days. And your first job, maybe it's running a bunch of in-circuit tests on those boards.
In-circuit tests? Sounds kind of intense.
It's like giving the board a checkup, making sure everything's flowing right, all the electricity and signals.
So you're using like special equipment for that?
Oh, yeah. You got all sorts of fancy tools for this. You're measuring the voltage and current, making sure it's all good.
I bet you need a good eye for that. Like you were saying before, got to spot those little details.
Exactly. It's like you can hear the board humming and you know if something's off key.
So what happens if our junior technician, what if they find something that's not quite right?
That's when the real detective work begins. First, they'll probably just look at the board, visually inspect it. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a bad solder joint or a component that's damaged. Something obvious.
And if it's not obvious?
Then it's time to bring in the big guns. You got your multimeter, your oscilloscope. These tools help you really see what's going on with the electricity flowing through the board.
So you can, visualize the problem.
Exactly. And this is where all that training, those certifications, they really pay off. Because you know what to look for. You have that deep knowledge of how it's all supposed to work.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening and they're like, all right, I'm sold. How do I become a PCB test technician? Where do they start?
Internships are amazing. Can't recommend those enough. But even if you can't get an internship right away, there are still ways to get experience.
What would you suggest?
Think about electronics repair shops. A lot of those places, they're happy to take on someone who's eager to learn. You might start with simple stuff, but it gets you comfortable with the work.
It's all about getting your hands dirty, right?
Yeah,
literally.
For sure. And don't be afraid to experiment on your own either. You can get a soldering kit, grab some old electronics, and just start taking them apart. See how it all works.
That's great advice. Okay, how about those certifications we keep talking about? Should you get those right away or
Those are super important, but usually you get those once you have some experience. But there are other ways to learn in the meantime.
like what?
You got online courses now. Places like Coursera, Udemy, they have tons of stuff on electronics, PCB design, all of it. And a lot of those courses are really affordable. Some are even free.
So much good information out there these days.
And another thing, networking is huge. Go to industry events, join those online forums. It's a great way to meet people who are already doing what you want to do.
Learn from the pros.
You got it. People in the PCB world, they love to share what they know.
Well, this has been awesome, super informative. So it seems like the key to becoming a PCB test technician is a passion for electronics and a willingness to never stop learning. Am I right?
100%. This field, it's challenging for sure, but man, it's rewarding. And the best part, the demand for skilled technicians, it's only going to keep growing.
That's what we like to hear. All right, huge thanks to our expert for walking us through all of this.
Anytime. Happy to be here.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another deep dive. We hope you learned something new today about this awesome career path. So next time your phone's not, bursting into flames, you can thank a PCB test technician. Until next time, keep those circuits humming.